Have you ever felt that some family mysteries are more than just stories whispered over old dinner tables? What if, tucked between Grandma's secret recipes and that dusty deck of playing cards in the back of a drawer, there was a dark secret? An ancient pact sealed with blood and magical symbols? That's exactly what happens when someone inherits not just a house but a hidden legacy soaked in occult rituals and shadowy energy. In this tale, you'll discover the haunting details of a curse passed down to a young woman who inherits her grandmother Eulalia's old house, a woman both feared and respected, often whispered about as a witch. What first seemed like a crumbling old structure quickly reveals itself as a sanctum of rituals, possessions, and dark entities. Every doorway hides a seal, and every whisper carries centuries of psychological terror. As the story unfolds, you'll be guided through shadows, apparitions, and long-buried truths that were never meant to resurface. And perhaps the most disturbing revelation of all, true horror doesn't always appear in what we can see but in what insists on staying unseen. Spirits, failed exorcisms, paranormal events, and an unexpected guardian weave a narrative where nothing is coincidence and no one walks away untouched. If you're drawn to stories that blur the lines between reality and the supernatural, the kind that makes you wonder, could this happen to me? Then keep watching. But fair warning, after this, you may never look at your grandmother's house the same way again. The inheritance arrived unexpectedly, like a whisper from the past. The protagonist, with only vague memories of her mysterious grandmother Eulalia, receives news that she's now the sole owner of the old house where the matriarch lived in seclusion until her final days. Stepping through the rusted gate, a chill runs down her spine. The air feels heavier, thick with a shadowy energy that defies explanation. The smell of mildew and wet earth clings to everything, like the house has been breathing alone for centuries. But what catches her eye most are the magical symbols carved into the wooden beam, seals, runes, and occult markings that seem to wait for someone. From the moment she sets foot inside, it's clear this isn't just an old house. It's a living presence, a silent guardian of paranormal stories that still echo through its halls. Moisture seeps through the walls as if the structure itself is weeping. The silence is deeper than normal, and the floorboards creak like they're protesting her arrival. Black and white photos, dusty and forgotten, seem to follow her movements. And in the portraits, Eulalia's expression holds something strange, as if she knew her granddaughter would one day return. Of course, no one mentioned Eulalia's reputation before the inheritance. In the village, she was a name whispered behind hands. Some called her a witch, others a healer who dabbled in forces she shouldn't. It was hard to separate legend from truth, but the objects left behind made it clear this wasn't just superstition. Bottles filled with thick liquids, dried roots hanging from cords, and untitled books piled in corners hinted at something far beyond understanding. It felt like everything had been left there on purpose, waiting to be found. And yet, there was something oddly familiar about it all. As the psychological fear began to gnaw at her sanity, another part of her felt connected to the place, to the legacy. It was as if an invisible force, maybe Eulalia herself, was pulling her deeper into this secret world. Every object seemed to hold meaning, every shadow a story left untold. The young woman didn't know it yet, but by opening that door, she hadn't just inherited a haunted house. She had unknowingly stepped into the role of the next guardian in an ancient curse. Each new room brought more mystery. It wasn't just the strange decor, there was a ritualistic order to how everything was placed. Bottles filled with dark liquids, twisted roots, and black candles formed what looked like an ancient altar. She couldn't decipher any of it, but deep down, she felt it was all part of a system, something designed to contain something. The magical symbols carved into the floor and doorframes weren't there for show, they looked like seals, markings to trap a dark energy within. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Even when she was alone, She felt invisible eyes tracking her every move, like something was testing her. This wasn't the kind of fear you get from a horror movie, it was psychological. The kind that slowly tightens around your chest and leaves you frozen, even without a visible threat. Just stepping into certain spots in the house shifted the air, like she was passing through invisible boundaries between this world and something else entirely. And the seals. They were everywhere. Some drawn in red chalk, others etched right into the floorboards. Circles with ancient-looking symbols, likely tied to the secret occult practices of her grandmother. The more she looked, the more she found beneath rugs, behind furniture, even in the walls themselves. It was as if the entire house had been transformed into a massive magical trap, not to keep people out, but to keep something locked inside. Day by day, the invisible surveillance became unbearable. No lock could calm her, no light could chase away the presence that lurked in every corner. She began to realize this wasn't just about Eulalia's memory, there was an active force here, one that responded to her curiosity. The energy was so thick, it felt like she could touch it. This wasn't just a haunted house. It was alive. And it was waiting for something or someone. The nights started to change. The silence that had once been merely unsettling now felt like a veil hiding whispers, muffled murmurs from upstairs or empty rooms. At exactly the same hour each night, she began to hear slow, dragging footsteps on the stairs, like someone retracing the same path over and over. The sound was hesitant but undeniably real. When she tried to brush it off, a sudden chill would flood the room, followed by the creeping sense that something was about to touch her skin. By the third night, there were no more doubts. Objects began to move. A necklace that had belonged to Eulalia showed up on her bed, even though it had been locked in a drawer. Lights flickered on and off, mirrors fogged up without reason, and one antique mirror even shattered with no one near it. She tried to rationalize faulty wiring, maybe a draft, but deep down, she knew the spirits were trying to make themselves known. And maybe, just maybe, they were angry that she was there. Then came the worst moment. One night, she woke up with crushing pressure on her chest, like something was sitting on her. She couldn't move or scream. With great effort, she opened her eyes and saw a figure cloaked in shadows, no face, but glowing ember-like eyes. It was evil. She was sure of it. And when she finally managed to move again, the figure vanished, leaving behind only fear and strange marks on her sheets. These events began to break her spirit. The invisible presence wasn't just watching anymore, it was interacting. It had weight, purpose, and a growing sense of ownership. Paranormal tales she used to roll her eyes at suddenly made terrifying sense. Everything pointed to something ancient and far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. And the worst part? It wasn't just in the house anymore, it was starting to seep into her. It was on a rainy afternoon that the neighbor, Doa Marita, showed up. An older woman with sharp eyes, layers of necklaces, colorful shawls, and an expression that blended pity with fear. "You shouldn't be here alone," she said, straight to the point. Marita had known Eulalia well more than that. She'd taken part in some of the secret rituals that had taken place inside that house. According to her, the house wasn't just a home, it was a prison. And what was locked inside it was anything but human. Over tea and wary glances around the room, Marita shared the story of Natalia, a girl from the village who, years ago, had been possessed by something terrifying. The entity that took over the child was powerful, cunning, and desperate for a body to inhabit. Eulalia couldn't destroy it, but she managed to trap it using an ancient ritual passed down through generations. That ritual is what carved the seals and magical symbols into the house. And from that moment on, the house became the demon's cage. Marita explained that Eulalia had spent her final years not just living in the house but guarding it. Not with brute force, but with constant vigilance and secret sacrifices. The dark energy had to be balanced, fed with offerings, so it wouldn't break free. But now that Eulalia was gone, the seals were weakening. The invisible presence was gaining strength again. Natalia survived, but was never the same. Some believed a part of the entity had stayed with her, even after the exorcism. The young woman was shaken. This wasn't just some exaggerated ghost story. And her grandmother wasn't just a strange old woman. Eulalia had been a true guardian, a woman who had dedicated her life to keeping evil contained. And now, unintentionally, her granddaughter had inherited that burden. The psychological fear tightened its grip with every revelation. And the real question began to take shape: what do you do when your inheritance isn't just bricks and memories but a living curse? After Marita's revelations, everything started to click. Eulalia hadn't just been the village witch, she had been the last line of defense between the demon and the outside world. The haunted house, marked with seals and magical symbols, functioned as an inverted sanctuary, a place where darkness was trapped, sealed under layers of occult knowledge. But it came at a price. The ritual that saved Natalia drained Eulalia's vitality little by little until she no longer had the strength to keep watch. Her death wasn't natural, at least not in the usual sense. Marita said Eulalia died the way guardians die, worn down by years of constant battle against a force that didn't belong in this world. Once she was gone, the seals began to weaken. And the house. The house started to breathe chaos. The granddaughter, now living there, could feel it growing stronger by the day. The shadow that once respected the boundaries now tested them. With every candle that went out, every whisper at night time was clearly running out. The truth was harsh and simple: the young woman had no knowledge of witchcraft. No family grimoire, no inherited powers, only fragments of stories, fading memories, and a growing intuition. She felt like someone dropped in the middle of a minefield with a map written in a dead language. Marita tried to help, teaching her basic protection sigils and how to maintain the jars used in rituals. But Eulalia's strength had come from something more: years of practice, secret pacts, and maybe a deal with darker forces. Still, something inside her, maybe a spark of Eulalia herself, pushed her forward. A quiet resilience that made her stay, even while trembling, even without understanding everything. Being a guardian wasn't a choice. It was a consequence. And she began to realize the house wasn't rejecting her, it was testing her. Every knock on the walls, every shadow in the mirror, every strange dream, all reminders. If she didn't step into her role, the entity would find a way to break free. And this time, there might be no one left to stop it. It was in her moment of desperation that a mysterious woman appeared, claiming to be a longtime friend of Eulalia's. Her name was Isabella, and she seemed to know exactly what was going on. Her presence was powerful, her words gentle, and her calmness unsettling. The young woman, tired and desperate, welcomed her in with relief. Finally, someone who had answers. But it quickly became clear not all help comes with good intentions. And not every friend of Grandma's could be trusted. Isabella knew far too much about the symbols, the seals, even the entity locked inside. With a soft voice and a dark glimmer in her eyes, she proposed a liberation ritual. She claimed the evil spirit didn't need to be trapped, it needed to be understood. Using one of Eulalia's old rings, she began erasing the marks on the floor, breaking the seals without hesitation. The girl hesitated, but it was too late. The shadow burst forth with a force that shook the house to its core. What happened next was fast and brutal. The entity, now freed, enveloped Isabella in a thick black mist, devouring her essence like it was draining years of stored energy. Within seconds, she stopped being a woman. She became a shell, a possessed vessel under the entity's full control. Her eyes turned hollow, her skin went pale, and her voice no longer human. The young woman stood frozen, horrified, witnessing the birth of a new threat. The entity hadn't just escaped, it now had a body. At that moment, the house seemed to exhale as if it had been waiting for this release. But unlike what Isabella had promised, there was no peace. There was invasion, possession, chaos. What had once been sealed in shadows and magic now walked freely, with weight and purpose. And the young woman understood, in the cruelest way possible, that Eulalia never intended to free the entity. She knew the risk. She knew one crack in the seal would mean disaster. And now, that disaster had a face, a voice, and a hunger. With full possession of Isabella's body, the entity was no longer just a hidden shadow. It walked, breathed, and spoke. What had once manifested as cold drafts and flickering lights now had skin, limbs, and a terrifying presence. Isabella's features were still there, but twisted, as if something had stitched a new being into her old body. Her voice was low and unnatural, speaking words in a language the girl didn't understand, but the walls seemed to vibrate with every syllable. Evil now had a shape. And it was starving. The house, already tense, became hostile. Picture frames fell on their own. Doors slammed with fury. Mirrors reflected distorted versions of the girl's own face. The entity seemed to be testing its limits in the new vessel, unleashing little horrors throughout the rooms. The young woman tried to keep control, to reactivate the seals, but it was no use. The enemy was no longer locked away. The battle had changed. Now, it was physical. And she was severely outmatched. In a desperate attempt to fight back, she turned to what little knowledge she had: fragments of Eulalia's journals, hidden under the floorboards, and memories of Marita's teachings. They spoke of an incomplete exorcism, of a ritual that should never be repeated. But they also mentioned an ancient name and a final seal, one that could sever the connection between body and spirit. The price, however, would be steep. She began to understand to banish the entity, she'd have to give up something deeply personal. Maybe even her life. As the days dragged on, the idea of running became more tempting. The house, now pulsing with dark energy, wasn't just haunted, it was a living threat. She barely slept, hardly ate, and lived in constant fear. The shadow that wore Isabella's face seemed to know everything: her location, her thoughts, her fears. And slowly, she began to wonder, was it only the house that was changing? Or was something inside her shifting too? In the end, the house couldn't hold itself together anymore. Cracks widened. Walls groaned, as if reacting to the entity's power. One by one, the old women of the village, those who held fragments of the past, began to die mysteriously. Marita was the last. Just before she passed, she whispered a warning: the seal is broken. All that's left is to run. The young woman knew then there would be no saving this place. Escape was her only option. And that's exactly what she did. She left everything behind. Fled in the middle of the night, heart pounding, eyes full of tears. She took only Eulalia's journal and the necklace marked with magical symbols, the one item that still seemed to hold some kind of power. As she turned the corner, she heard a final, deafening crack. The house collapsed, as if crushed under the weight of centuries of witchcraft, rituals, and possession. But there was no relief. Only silence. A hollow stillness, like something had slipped out with the dust. The doubt lingered like a personal ghost. Had the spirit been destroyed in the wreckage? Or had it finally found freedom in another form? The girl moved far away, but the psychological fear followed. Sometimes, in certain mirrors, she still saw strange reflections. and in the dead of night, she would feel that familiar weight on her chest. The invisible presence might have changed its address, but it hadn't disappeared. Her story became local legend, shared in hushed voices and on eerie internet forums. No one dared step near the ruins of Eulalia's house. Nature had reclaimed it, as if the earth itself wanted to bury the past. And the girl, now far away, lived in constant vigilance. Each new night brought the same question: did the curse end with the house? Or was it only the beginning of something far worse? What if your family's secrets were more than just old tales? Maybe we're not ready for the things we inherit, not just the heirlooms and houses, but the energies, the memories, the invisible pacts. This story isn't just about a haunted house. It's about a legacy of silence and shadow passed down through blood. And what about you? Have you ever wondered what really lies beneath your family's traditions? How many times have you ignored that uncomfortable feeling? That shadow in the corner of the room? That object that moves when no one's looking? The line between the logical and the unexplainable is thinner than we think. Eulalia's story and the young woman who followed in her steps is a powerful reminder the past isn't always buried. Sometimes, it's waiting to be woken up. So let me ask you, would you have the courage to step into that house? Would you be strong enough to face a legacy like that? Or worse, does any of this feel a little too familiar? Let those questions echo in your mind. Maybe they'll help you realize that some doors should stay closed. Or maybe some of them have already been open for a long, long time. If this story gave you chills, sparked your curiosity, or made you pause and think, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and share it with someone who loves to explore the dark unknown. Because stories like this still have more to reveal, and some of them might be closer than you think.